Please do, if you want, please stand up. Apparently we use 25% more calories standing up than sitting down. Healthy aging and all of that. And also, please heckle if you want. I don't mind. It makes it a bit more fun. Okay, I'm going to run through some things pretty quickly, run through slides pretty quickly, but we can share the slides afterwards. The world of tech has changed a huge amount over a relatively short time. We've gone from lots of very expensive devices into one very small device that does exactly the same, in fact much better than all of these separate devices used to do. On the other hand, particularly in Europe and the West, we face this problem where actually some bits of technology are actually really slowing down. Yeah? Actually, we used to be able to get to New York a lot quicker than we can today. In the Victorian age, we used to be able to build a railway in 5 years. Yeah, actually, in certain ways, technology is actually slowing down, not speeding up. So I think we've got to have that context of in terms of this debate. Perhaps, I suppose I'd say that and Bill Gates has a very similar quote. In the short run, we probably overestimate how things will change, but actually we underestimate the long-term impact. What we know is that there should be a big and growing market for technology in the context of aging. Older people spend a huge amount of money. They're likely to be spending £6 billion a week by 2037. So there is a big market there. And there is increasing evidence that older people like to play, surprisingly. This is a great piece from the Times about growth in number of toys being bought by adults. And in 2013, we did a piece of work on communities, and I found myself on the BBC Breakfast sofa defending one of our recommendations, which was why we should have swings at bus stops for people of all ages to play on. And last week, actually, I saw a lady, a Muslim lady, in her probably 70s outside King's Cross Station doing exactly that, sitting on the swing, playing it. Actually, we've got to make communities much more fun, and not just for children, but for all ages. But play is not just for kids, and tech has got an important role for us. We know that I've talked a bit about the market growing, so I won't say very much about that. There is an argument that technology could help us cut the costs of aging. We know that as a result of aging, healthcare, social care, financial costs are likely to increase. Although over the last 15, 20 years, it's very clear that technology has actually pushed up the costs of aging rather than reduced it. Technology is not a magic savior. In fact, technology in the health service is what, as much as demographic change, has driven in increased costs. Actually, the ability to do more and more clever things pushes up the cost of delivering. And in fact, if you, we are likely to need much more significant productivity growth through technology. But I think we've got to be very careful about whether technology doesn't actually just add to extra financial pressures. We know technology has a huge role in could help us get around as we age. It can help us become more engaged with society, help us potentially live independently at home. Although I'm a big fan of actually very low-level technologies. The one bit of kit I think we've got more evidence that works than we have any other is a bath rail, and yet actually we're obsessed with smart homes. Actually, how do we get the basic low-level kit into people's hands? How do we convince me to buy a bath rail? How do we convince B&Q to sell a bath rail? Because they don't, unless you go to their accessibility website and their accessibility brochure. Before we've had the fall, we're going into putting these things in after we've had the fall, which is a waste of thousands and thousands of pounds, sometimes tens of thousands. Technology has got a big role in terms of helping us with our daily activities. This is difficulty for shopping for groceries, making telephone calls, managing money. And you'll see as we get older, we all find these a little bit more difficult. Interestingly, though, if you look at this, and there might be most of the challenges we have don't come until we're 75-ish, and actually and in fact it's in our 80s and 90s where we start to find it really difficult to manage money and make phone calls and do shopping. So actually, one of the problems for industry here is the market isn't that big. actually we're talking about relatively small numbers of older people. Most older people aren't, are not in their 90s. So I think we've got to be conscious of that, and actually also be conscious that technology and innovation has actually made the world more complex, not less. So actually we found the introduction of bits of kit have actually sort of made our lives actually more difficult on occasion. I'll come back to that. We have undoubtedly seen innovation, and over the last 140 years ago, we had the first phone call. Whilst it took, it's in 2000, not very long ago, under 20 years ago, half the world didn't own a phone. But by 2007, half the world had a mobile phone. Yet actually the pace of change in terms of access, in terms of global access and tackling inequalities of access has been astonishing. The mainstream sector is beginning to understand aging. For years we've been talking about OXO Good Grit, BT's Big Button. Amazon's an interesting one. So Amazon have invested millions in redesigning packaging. I don't know if any of you used to buy Amazon Amazon products 15 years ago. It's really hard to get the boxes open. They've spent millions on redesigning the stuff, so it's now actually really easy. And it's because they realised we've got this aging society, and actually it's easy for all of us to have a package that opens well. Even Google gets it. Google overnight, about 10 years ago now, they doubled the size of the entry box. They didn't tell anyone about it. There was no message overnight. They just doubled this. On one of their developer blogs, they said, basically, we've realized we've got this aging population, and bigger font size is easier for people to read. But there was no way Google was publicly about to announce this, because of course there's a bit of ageism here. They don't really want to sell themselves as offering services for older people, but clearly they want the services to be as accessible as possible. We have technology facilitating greater flexible working, greater home working. Could be really useful in terms of helping support older people to work longer. Technology is potentially helping us keep healthier for longer. We have these. How many people have want a wearable, a smartwatch? That's not a bad number. Loads of potential. I'm a bit of a geek in this, so I'm on Strava and Garmin Connect and obsessed with competing with people. And actually, it appears, there's mixed evidence, but competition seems to be quite good for us, as indeed does financial rewards. And there was, for a short period in the UK, an organisation, it still exists, but it doesn't really work anymore, called Bounce, where for every time you did 7,000 steps, you basically essentially qualify. You could build up points to qualify for £10 Amazon gift vouchers, and of course it went bust because lots of people succeeded. And I got about 50 quid out of it. It was brilliant. And what we know, though, and one of the problems with this is humans are terrible. Humans cheat. This is a drill which someone's attached to one of these things. Of course, there are some insurance companies that are offering discounts for using this. I talk about this because actually I was with an academic from York who was saying to me that he'd done some work where he had, because there's always, there are, and I'll talk a bit about privacy, but there are always these fears about how do we as individuals maintain control when we have all of this monitoring going on. And he was saying that he did a very minor experiment where he measured his son's temperature every day, and he found that his son's temperature was always higher on the day he had gym class. In other words, his son was basically manipulating the data because he didn't want to do gym. He found that that basically what he started to find was that if people become aware that slightly higher blood pressure would mean that you either have access to a GP or don't have access to a GP, people choose the time they measure their blood pressure. So they might run up and down the stairs and then do it. So actually people are very clever, and actually it's not necessarily to get people access. You might find it's the opposite, that someone doesn't want to see a GP, so they would only ever do their testing at the point when they thought they were feeling good. So these humans are very manipulative, but they do manage at the moment to control some of the technology. Cheat. I think the promise is there, but the progress is still slow. And this is my Google image search for technology and aging. It's amazing how many white women are smiling at computers. And we've got this story around tech and aging, which is all about people in makeup smiling, and it's not. I think it's not healthy. I don't think it's helpful. I don't think it's the story. I don't think it's balanced. And I think we've got iPad for dummies. Oh, it's terrible. And actually, it was more than 20 years ago now that Tony Blair announced electronic patient records, and we're still not there. 20 years. It is astonishing how slow it has taken the NHS to drive change in this area. And yet government is obsessed with technology as being a solution. And I'm just going to run through these quickly. Department of Health in 2005, DWP in 2005, sees the potential of technology to deliver a better later life. Wanless talked about new service models and technology in 2006. In 2009, the Department of Health said technology will solve. In 2009, a different Department of Health report said technology will solve aging. 2013, the House of Lords said technology will solve aging. 2014, the Department of Health said technology will save aging. And in fact, we've just had another report from a government select committee that says technology will save social care. Actually, technology won't solve some of these problems. And yet, actually, government is looking for a really simple solution for very complicated programs. We have problems. We have this real obsession with apps, memory apps, 10 best apps for older people. In 2011, the health minister, Andrew Lansley, called on health professionals to design apps for health-related smartphone apps and information. At the time, there were already, I think, something like 200,000 health apps. I don't think people really get it. There is not where, it is not, the problem is not the technology. Where might technology help us? So, actually, this was a story from a couple of weeks ago. Amazon's no checkout store threatens death of the cashier. Essentially, it's a store where you just put stuff in your basket and then leave. I know some people who do that anyway, but I think you're allowed to do this. Very, very interesting on all sorts of levels. You see developments into the sharing economy in terms of opportunities for work for older people. This guy here is a guy who runs an Indian restaurant in Birmingham from a disused aeroplane. Basically can't recruit. There are major problems in terms of recruitment, skills shortages. There's also major opportunities, things like Airbnb and TaskRabbit, opportunities for older people to sell their services, sell their home occasionally. One of my colleagues who works in the team at ILC has, up until recently, lived in a shared flat in Kensington, and he worked out that he could get more money by just renting out the flat on Airbnb than he was being paid by ILC. Actually, the potential for some of these, and I'm not saying we don't pay him anything, but actually the returns you can get living in a shabby flat in Kensington per night are huge. There are a lot of people with empty rooms, so there is potential in this area. But coming back to the Amazon issue and the sort of tech issue, is all this just going to take away jobs? There's this venture capitalist yesterday last week who was presenting, who talked about in a lot of cases AI can do the work of 1,000 interns. This is actually slightly scary, actually, if this is true. I don't think it really is, but we'll see. I think what we'll see is a bit more of things like this. The United States, this is and there's been a lot of work developing this since over the last 4 or 5 years. This is Google Flu. Google were something like 2 to 3 weeks ahead of the American government of predicting flu, and they did it on search terms. They know where you are, they know what search terms people look for. They developed an algorithm and had basically worked out that, had managed ahead of the American government to predict flu. There's massive potential, also big risks of this sort of technology. in terms of developing both services, but also selling us services, some which we might want, some which we might not. There is things like this. This is quite old now, but it's still very interesting, where you put your postcode in and complain about a pothole and it gets sent straight to your local authority. Of course, big makes it much easier for people to engage with their communities. Of course, what it tends to do is make it much easier for middle-class people to engage with their communities. And what you see is really interesting if you look at where the reports of potholes or disused cars or dog muck is actually, it tends to be in areas where people are wealthy and have internet access and are interested in this sort of thing. And so actually what you might see is some of these technologies might well solve the problems of potholes in wealthy areas. But they're still very interesting. There's a guy some of you may know, Charlie Musselwhite from Swansea, brilliant researcher who's done some work on virtual travel and age. Last week, there's a Japanese tour company offered virtual reality holidays with a first-class seat. Basically, you don't have to get in a plane. They put you on what looks like a business-class bed. They give you what is like aeroplane food, and you can watch some planes and experience turbulence, I suspect, as well. But basically, it costs about £60. You haven't got the hassle. Actually, there might be something about the potential for some of these services. Again, I was with a futurologist, though, who was saying that a few years ago, he was saying that what probably drives some of this AI stuff is, and apparently we're not far off from being able to replicate sensation in the body. So essentially, we could be wearing these glasses, and you could feel like, and you could be going on a beach scene, and it could feel like that you're walking on sand. So we are really not far from this. But he was saying that, clearly what he thinks will drive this is, of course, the minute we can replicate sensation is, of course, the same thing that has driven the whole of the internet, basically sex. Basically, his argument is that the market, the minute that you can replicate orgasm using some of these sorts of technologies, it's going to drive a completely new set of services. Probably not for now, but we did do some interesting work on sex and older people, but that's probably totally not. But interesting. And this sort of thing will undoubtedly change some of the things we're talking about, and change the way we live our lives. We're likely to see more and more use of data. It's now probably possible to predict dementia based on how we spend. What's the responsibility a bank has if an algorithm starts to tell them this person seems to have an indication of dementia? Do they have a responsibility? How do they deal with it? Royal Free have allowed DeepMind to have 1.6 million NHS records. As Chinese government put online a data set with 1 to 2 million free data sets. There's a lot of data getting out there that has potential to be used. And I know we've got colleagues from China, but this was a story from a couple of weeks ago. It was in the New Scientist about a smart city in China where every resident is tracked, activity on social networks, purchases, movements, commutes, everything uploaded in real time. Traffic congestion, road accidents and crime all down, wired up everyone's mobile phones, informing them of traffic conditions. It's very interesting. One of the really interesting things if I was in the industry in the UK is I would be looking to China and thinking, we can't do that here. Actually, our potential for us to grow the industry in the UK or indeed Europe because of regulation, we're not going to be able to do it. We might as well go to China. We might as well go to somewhere where they're just going to give us all these records and we can play with it. And I think one of the things for UK and Europe is that actually we're going to have to be aware that some countries are going to be way ahead because they're not going to have the same regulatory barriers we are in terms of actually testing some of these things out. What I don't think we're really talking about is humanoid robots, mainly because they cost huge amounts of money, and I can't see that necessarily changing. There was a piece in The Guardian a few weeks ago that said in Japan, robots will care for 80% of elderly by 2020, and then actually I spotted within about 2 days they'd actually changed the headline, because actually that wasn't what it said at all. It basically said, robots will help us, and of course robots help us already, robots help us in all sorts of ways. We at Rory Kethlen-Jones again, how much do we want this? Used robots where, where in effect carrying people instead of humans. Is it the sort of vision we want? Yeah, I don't know. What we probably do want is more of this, you know, and some people are already using this. This is basically a vacuum cleaner, you know, actually, you know, it makes complete sense in some circumstances, although I'll come back to it. You know, to actually have devices that help us live our lives. I'm not obsessed with sex, I should say, but you know, this again, new scientists, you know, for exactly some of the reasons we've been talking about, new scientists ran a piece, Why Granny's Only Robot Will Be a Sex Robot, and he was actually talking about exactly these sort of things, that actually there are real ethical problems, there are moral problems, there are real issues why actually care bots won't take off. As The Guardian said, being left with a care bot is another way of dying more miserably. So I think we've got to be careful about some of this. There's this great thing, for the last few years in some hospitals, we've been using robots to deliver medicines from pharmacies to wards, and it's quite interesting. It's now in Milton Keynes, robots on the streets doing this, and it's weird, I have to say. You know, if you've got like a robot that doesn't know how to deal with a bus going around the streets of Milton Keynes delivering stuff, it's very, very strange, but actually I think real challenges are likely to come from this. I think there's lots of opportunity. I've talked about, I won't say very much about pension dashboard, but actually things like open banking is a really interesting area. Open banking has just started in the UK. Essentially what it will allow is us to choose to give our financial data to basically allow platforms to access all of our financial data so they can then help us shop around. So you'll log into one place and it will give you potentially all of your banks, all of your debts, all of your credit cards in one place. And they might then say, actually, here's an insurance, here's the cheapest insurance for you, or here is a better bank account that will get you a better return. So that over the next couple of years will offer lots of potential. And I was with the industry yesterday, and one of the things they were talking about is actually how can we make this accessible for people who aren't online. So actually what you need to do is a version of open banking where you can still go into a store, and into a shop or into your bank, and they'll do exactly the same. You know, you don't have to actually do it yourself. You will go into a branch and they'll put all your details in front of you and say, well, actually, you can do this. So lots and lots of really interesting opportunities. What are the challenges? I think one of the first challenges is actually we've got to convince older people to invest. You know, we know that the difference between consumption and expenditure in old age is huge. It's something like £48 billion a year. Older people are, on average in the UK, not spending the money they have. I think we've got to engage people better, engage older people better. There is a lot of fear around technology across the life course, actually. And I think we've got to just engage a bit more with people of all ages. I was talking to a colleague from Northern Ireland yesterday about the ethical issues. You know, actually, you know, what if we don't want to be monitored? What if we don't want our family to know we've had our noodles in the morning? What if, you know, we've got a, you know, how do we deal with this as a society? How do we start to get permission to make some of these changes as individuals? You know, I was talking to someone in a care home who was saying, you know, actually, so dementia tagging is another one. Do we, you know, would we prefer to have a dementia tag or go into a care home? You know, we're not even talking about some of these things, and I appreciate it's not a zero-sum game, but actually we're not having those conversations. Would we prefer, you know, a mat under our bed that senses urine in a care home, or would we prefer someone to come and put their hand in the bed once a night to see if we've got the bed? You know, actually, which is the least intrusive? And we're just not having these debates. I think we've got to ensure social care is funded. We've got to deliver. Let me just finish by talking a bit about inclusive design, because I know it's very important, and I think it is important. And we still have, you know, technology is so much better than it was even 5 years ago. It's much more accessible. But we still have a world where we're designing crazy stuff, and I won't look to the architects on Monday, but, you know, this was a tweet from a journalist recently. You know, I'm a smart human being, and with a degree, a master's degree, and I have absolutely no idea how to sit on this chair. And then someone from the sports department, when you solve this riddle, please come over to sports. You know, actually, what is it about usability? There's a big thing going on now about how uncomfortable the new seats are on these trains, and it's exactly, you know, we know some of these things are wrong, and yet actually we're doing it. sorry, and I've just realised I've got another slide about sex, but Pornhub, this is not an obsession, I didn't realise it was, Pornhub have actually do audio description, apparently, on their website. So I'll just leave it there. You know, even porn websites understand inclusive design. So what have we got to do? I think we've got to stop governments and people like me coming up here onto stages. They, oh my goodness, isn't technology brilliant? It will solve everything, because it won't. It will be more expensive. It will help some people, but actually it probably isn't the magic solution. I think we've got to better engage older people. We've got to have a proper debate about data sharing. I think we've got to be conscious that humans are lazy and that physical activity works. And one of the real risks we've got at the moment with technology is almost everything about technology is about stopping us needing to walk to the shops, or stopping us needing to hoover or vacuum clean. Actually, this is a massive risk that technology will make us even more lazy than we already are. I'm going to finish by talking about something we're about to do. We're about to launch this initiative called Innovating for Aging, which is a project where what we want is people like you, anyone to come and talk to us with some of the ideas of how you think vulnerable consumers are being let down in the private sector. And what we're about to do is a call for, come and tell us about your problems, and then we're going to go out to the tech community and get them to try and solve some of those problems. The website will work, but it's currently pointing to our site, but next week it will go to the proper site, I think. So please do contribute your ideas, and thank you very much.